What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's the Game Week 16 preview, so I'm going to take you through a bunch of questions and topics that you put to me on Twitter and give you my opinion. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, and if you haven't done so already, please do hit that subscribe button. It's going to take you 2 seconds to do. So we're going to start off with one of the topics that came up quite a lot, which is 1 week punts for Game Week 16. Now, I've talked about unlimited transfers quite a lot over the last week or two. Some people still don't seem to understand what that means. So once we get to the Game Week 16 deadline and that goes past, and then FPL updates and you get to see your team for Game Week 17, you will be able to make unlimited transfers to that team and none of them will cost you any points, right? And that is basically because of the World Cup break. So over the World Cup, you can tinker with your team as much as you want. It's not going to cost you any points. It's similar to a wild card, apart from you don't get to choose when to use it. So you will have another wild card you can use in the second half of the season, but for unlimited transfers you have to use it before Game Week 17, and the transfers that you make will count to your overall transfers made, which can have some effect on overall rank if points and stuff are tied. I wouldn't worry too much about that, but just know if you want to change 7 or 8 of your players before Game Week 17, you can do that for free. Because of that, lots of people are looking for 1 week punts in Game Week 16. So let's talk about a few of them. You already know that Darwin Núñez is probably one of my favourites. If you can afford a forward that, and you've already got Haaland or Kane, or you can't afford those 2 players, I think Darwin Núñez is probably the 3rd best forward. We saw last night in the Carabao Cup that Liverpool did rotate very heavily. I think Núñez started on the bench. Salah wasn't even in the squad at all. So Núñez looks pretty good for a start in Game Week 16. So he's the number 1 forward I would go for if I couldn't afford Kane, or if I couldn't afford Haaland, or if I already had those players, etc. And you can see his ownership in the top 10k is 4.85%. Now, these numbers are taken from live FPL. They're based on people's squads from Game Week 15. So obviously, those of you that are buying Darwin Núñez, that might include some of the people in the top 10k, that ownership will go up. It's not going to suddenly be 80%. So I think he's a pretty big differential. You can see his expected goal involvement numbers, 1. That is extremely good. I know he hasn't, necessarily played every single game and been on the pitch for 80 to 90 minutes. So if he was in that position where he was playing a lot more, maybe those numbers will come down, but that is still very, very encouraging. Like I've said before, he can be a little bit frustrating in that he gets a lot of chances, doesn't necessarily always put them away, but he gets so many chances, and he does create chances as well, that at some point he's getting a big haul. Why not against Southampton at home? I know they're going to have a new manager and stuff like that. I wouldn't worry about it. It's at Anfield. I expect Liverpool to do pretty well. Kulusevski is another one that quite a few have talked about. 0.41 expected goal involvement is okay. It's mostly skewed towards assists. Obviously, he has been out injured as well. I do think he'll play. I think him and Richarlison have got a good chance of coming back in to that Spurs squad sorry, not even the squad, into the first 11 for Game Week 16. And it is against Leeds at home. My only worry is with Spurs right now, and look, sometimes they're getting results, and I know Harry Kane is still scoring goals, but they're just very sluggish. Even like they lost last night, and I know it wasn't their completely full strength team because they do have injuries, but it wasn't exactly a weak team either, I would argue. And they lost 2-0 to Nottingham Forest. Maybe, I saw some Spurs fans saying that maybe Kane's a little bit sluggish now because he's had to play so many minutes, etc. It just worries me a little bit. But obviously, Kulusevski coming back will help them. If Richarlison starts as well, that will help them too. They have been big misses to this squad. So I think he's an okay punt for 8 million. But what I would say, and I don't have him on this list, is Phil Foden didn't play at all last night. And I know we've been here before over the last 3 weeks, but I think there's a good chance that Foden now starts in Game Week 16. And if he does, I would much rather have him than Kulusevski. So it depends whether you want to take the risk on the start for Foden, but that's just something to consider. Bowen's obviously got a home fixture this week against Leicester. Pretty good, 5.42%. You could go for Ben Rama. He played 290 minutes in Game Weeks 13 and 14, I think it was. And in Game Week 15, he only just made it past 60 minutes. But if he is on the pitch, he'll probably be on penalties as well. So you could look to Bowen or Ben Rama. I don't know if it's necessarily that great of a game. I don't think Leicester will keep a clean sheet, but I don't think they'll concede a huge amount. And West Ham aren't really scoring a huge amount, but I just noticed that his ownership was low. So if you want to take a bit of a punt, you could look there. Personally, I would rather go for Kulusevski or Foden, I reckon. Grealish as well could start. I guess it's not a guarantee, that's the only thing, but he's only 0.2% owned. So if we found out he was going to start for Man City, he could be an option at only 6.8. But again, if Foden now looks like he'd start, he is definitely the one I would go for if you've got that much money. Martial, let's see what happens in Man United's game in the Carabao Cup tonight. If Martial doesn't play and he's on the bench and he comes on for a few minutes, that would then indicate that he's probably going to start against Fulham. And I think that Fulham away fixture is pretty good for Man United. Like, I'm not saying that Man United will necessarily win the game, because I think Fulham will cause them some problems. But I think Martial at 6.7 million, like there's those of us that might be looking to move on kind of Alvarez, for example. Some of you might want to move on Mitrovic. Maybe Callum Wilson is not guaranteed to play. Obviously, if you've got the money, you could go up to Jesus or Firmino or Darwin Núñez. But if you don't, and Martial looks like he's going to start and he's predicted to start, that could be a nice differential. 0.08% owned. Man United are scoring in that game. I think they can get a couple. And if he plays as a number 9, he could be decent. And I've put Trent Alexander-Arnold on the list. Now, he's not been great, but I think when you think of 1 week punts, you want someone that's low owned, if you can, 4.61% ownership. And you want someone that you know can deliver the goods. Even if they haven't been doing it recently, you know that Trent Alexander-Arnold is a player that is capable of a clean sheet, an assist and a goal to get a massive haul. So if the rest of your team looks good, midfielders and forwards, and you need to make a defensive punt instead, and it's only 1 week, you can get rid of him after this if it fails. Trent Alexander-Arnold's got to be worth a go. Like, he is super low. Look, and trust me, I've had him for the last few weeks. It hasn't gone well at all, but there's still that hope that Southampton at home could be the game where he comes good. I know a lot of people are looking at Perisic as well. I don't hate that at all, right? And obviously he's a lot cheaper, so he's easier to get to. But I don't think he's going to play in the front three. But he should play as a left wing back, because I think Sessegnon got injured last night and had to play on because they'd already made a 5th sub. I think there was a bit of miscommunication. So Perisic will almost certainly play in game week 16, but it might not be in the front 2 or the front 3. It's probably going to be as a left wing back. Now, he attacks in that position, right? He's still going to get forward. But I just, like, Spurs keep conceding. Like, can Spurs go and beat Leeds? Yes. Will Leeds score? Possibly. And that's what worries me. So then you're relying on attack and returns, which he could get. But if I was only having one of Trent or Perisic this week, I'm going to stick to my man at Liverpool, Trent Alexander-Arnold, and hope he can get something. And again, it's not saying that he definitely will score big, but when we're talking about 1 week punts that you don't have to worry about afterwards, you want someone that you know can deliver. And that is Perisic as well, of course. I think Trent Alexander-Arnold, why everyone is kind of just so off him, this might be the time to get him in. All right, we're going to need a hits counter for this question, because I've recorded this multiple times at this point, and it's really difficult to not say hits over and over again. So let me know down in the comments below how many you hear. Is it worth taking a hit or multiple hits, since we all get unlimited free transfers in game week 17? Essentially, because we have those unlimited free transfers, you should be thinking about taking less hits, not more. Because any players you bring in for a 4-point hit, 8-point, 12-point, whatever it is, they've got to repay those points this week. Usually, when people take hits, they justify it that the player they're bringing in is for captaincy reasons and they're going to want them for the future weeks, or they just think they're a better player this week and they'll also repay those points over the next, whatever it is, 2, 3, 4 weeks. But you can't make that argument this week, because any players you want for the long term, you can get in game week 17 for free with those unlimited free transfers. So the blanket answer is, the broad answer, most people do not need to take hits this week. That doesn't mean they're not, like, it couldn't work out, because I'm sure when I do the deadline stream, I'm going to be like, you don't need to take a hit, you don't need to take a hit, and then someone will put a question in and I'll be like, yeah, actually that's a pretty good hit. But for most people, it's not going to be worth it. If captaincy is factored in, for example, if you want to bring Haaland back for a hit and you want to captain him because you're sure he's going to start, that could be worth it. If you've got multiple injuries, suspensions and stuff like that, there are scenarios where it could work, but for most people, it's just not going to be needed. So if I take you to my team, for example, could this team look better? Bearing in mind I've got about 2 million in the bank, if I remove Trent Alexander-Arnold for a cheaper defender, maybe move someone else around to upgrade Alvarez or Solanke to Harry Kane, possibly, but that's not worth 4 or 8 points. I'm not going to captain Harry Kane this week. I'm going to captain either Salah or Haaland if he's starting, so I don't need to worry about that. So is Harry Kane likely to repay like an 8 or a 12-point hit? Pretty much no. So some of you will be able to justify 4-point hits this week. I would say there's very few teams out there that genuinely need like an 8 or a 12-point hit. So Is it worth it? As always, that's going to depend on who you're taking out, who you could play off your bench instead. So again, coming back to my team, it makes it even harder to take the hits this week because Andreas, Webster and Gay are all okay to play if I need to. So I think for me, like my team's in pretty good shape, right? So maybe I'm not the target of this question, but a lot of you will have good benches out there, which will mean, again, taking those hits are even less viable. So you might be able to just justify a -4, especially if it's for captaincy. Any more than that, I think it would be difficult to find a team that kind of genuinely, let me get my words out, needs it this week. Alright, so how concerned should we be about going for triple Arsenal attack against Wolves away? And then the person that asked the question says, for what it's worth, I'm not concerned about it, but I see some with hesitancy about doing it. And you can apply this to any team you're ever thinking about tripling up on for attack. And I know what people get worried about, that they're going to go in with triple attack from a team and that team will only go and score 1 goal, and therefore at most you can have 2 returns from your 3 players, right? You can have the player that scores and the player that assists. It could be that Arsenal go and win 3-0, and if you're looking at kind of Jesus, Martinelli and Saka, for example, then none of them get any returns. It could be Tierney or White or Gabriel or Xhaka, right? Odegaard even. We have to accept that players will sometimes blank. You're going to have very few weeks over the whole season where every single one of your 11 will return. It just doesn't happen that often. It could be that 2 players blank and 1 player gets 3 returns, of course, and ultimately in total you get 11 returns, but every single player returning, that doesn't happen that often. So essentially, we shouldn't base our opinion on who to bring in on who we already own. We should only be buying the best player. So take my team, for example. I'm in this exact predicament. I've got Saka and Martinelli, and I will probably remove Alvarez this week. I won't go into too much detail about, if this player starts and that player starts. Let's say I'm selling Alvarez this week, and I've got enough money to buy Jesus or Firmino, and I think they're the 2 best options. It shouldn't be Jesus or Firmino, but actually I already own 2 Arsenal attackers, so therefore I'll just default to Firmino. If I think Firmino is the best option, I should buy him. If I think Jesus is better than Firmino, he's the one I should buy. Because what happens if Arsenal go and score 3 goals against Wolves, and Jesus scores a hat-trick, and Saka and Martinelli don't assist any of those goals, and they blank? Well, I could have looked at it as though, I don't want that 3rd Arsenal player because tripling up on attack is a risk, and I come away with no returns, and Jesus owners have a hat-trick. So we should just be trying to buy the best players. I know psychologically it can be annoying having a triple up and that team doesn't do that well, but Arsenal are one of the best attacks in the league this season, so there shouldn't really be any hesitancy about doing it. Whether or not Jesus is better than Firmino, that's up to you. I think for what it's worth, he probably is in general, but it is an away game versus Liverpool's home game, so you might want to go for Firmino instead, but that's completely up to you. I actually put this together where Jesus' underlying numbers so far this year, 0.81 expected goal involvement, is better than Firmino. And you look at Arsenal's XG per 90 so far this season, is 1.82. That's the same as Man City. They are one of the best attacks in the league this season so far. They're playing excellently. You look at Wolves' expected goals conceded, 1.14. That's actually the 7th best, right? So it's not bad. But when you look at some of the teams they played, Man City, they kept them down to 1.1. Spurs 1.7, Newcastle 1.7, Chelsea 1.9. So when you've got, the 7th best defence from a stats perspective that's doing okay, that looks like you don't necessarily want to go and attack them with FPL players. But then you look at Arsenal, one of the best attacks, they could easily go against Wolves and get 1, 2 or even 3 goals. So having more players kind of in your FPL squad from that team seems pretty good. So I would try, I know it's difficult sometimes because from a psychological point of view of having a triple up and worrying about that 1-0, but if you can, you should ignore who you already own. If you're bringing in a forward, you buy the best forward you can get for the money you've got. If you're bringing in a midfielder, you buy the best midfielder you can get for the money you've got. And for this week, it's for game week 16 only. So if I've got 8.1 million to spend, Jesus probably is the best option. So I'll probably cover this one again once we've heard from all the managers in the press conferences on Friday, but what should we be doing with Callum Wilson? So if he's given the all clear by Eddie Howe and you've got other transfers to do, I think it's perfectly okay to keep Callum Wilson against Chelsea at home. I think Newcastle will cause them problems. Callum Wilson himself is always involved with any goals that they score, or generally is anyway. He's on penalty, so if he's given the all clear, I think he's fine. If Eddie Howe puts any doubts on it, I would maybe then look to move him on. And that's going to come down to kind of how much money you've got to spend. If you've got the money to go up to like a Nunez or a Jesus or something like that, that probably is a good move. Obviously, if you've got the money to go to Harry Kane, that's also excellent. If you have to come down in price, it gets a little bit trickier in terms of, oh sorry, not even down in price, but around the same price. That gets a little bit trickier. So you've got Tony, but he's playing Man City. Jesus and Firmino I've already talked about, but Wilson is 7.5. So Solanke might even be one of the next best options at kind of, what is he, 5.7 million now. He's come back down again, I think. I think he went up to 5.8 at one point, but he's got Everton at home, so I think that's a pretty good fixture. Like, Aston Villa is Brighton away, so it's not that great. I wouldn't back Watkins anyway at this point. You could look at Danny Ings, for example, but there's just not a huge amount of options. So I would probably, unless I've got money to kind of upgrade, I would probably be looking to try and hold on to him if I can, just because I think he can do something against Chelsea. It's probably that kind of illness, because he did play and then come off. I think he felt a bit dizzy or something. So he's had like another week off, so hopefully he'll be okay. We're also going to find out what the England squad is later today, so let's see if he's in that or not, because if he's in it, maybe he'll play up this illness a little bit more. We don't know. For what it's worth, really quickly, this is not just about Wilson. I do think there is a chance, given that some high-profile players are missing the World Cup, or they're very close to missing the World Cup. If a player does have like a really minor knock or something, they might, I don't know, they're professional players, so I'd like to think they wouldn't do it, but they're also human. For a lot of players, this may be their only chance to play in their World Cup, their last chance to play in the World Cup, their first World Cup. All those things mean a lot to players. So it could be that, you know, if he's a bit ill, he might play it up a little bit more. So I would be slightly worried, but if anyhow gives him the all clear, that would probably point more towards the fact that he's going to start. So I think it then comes down to how many other issues you've got in your squad to kind of deal with. If you don't, if your team's looking pretty good and Callum Wilson's the only player that you need to deal with, and he is somewhat of a slight doubt, then you can probably just move him on. But I would want the money to upgrade to a Jesus or a Darwin Nunez in order to sell Wilson this week, I think, because he is a pretty good option, one of the best, I would say. So I know I've already talked about hits, but Haaland is obviously such a big player for us for FPL. I wanted to answer this question separately. So is it worth taking a -4 to get Haaland back? And I think essentially it comes back down to that captaincy question. Are you going to captain him? And if you are, then yes, it probably is worth that -4, because we know what kind of devastation he can deliver. Now, whether or not you should captain him really depends on whether you think he's going to start, whether you're happy to try and wait until Saturday and then risk the servers going down and stuff like that. I'm not quite sure what to make of the Carabao Cup fixture against Chelsea, because he was on the bench, which tells me he's fit enough if Pep had to call on him, maybe a little bit like the Fulham game, but he didn't get any minutes. So is that just Pep fully resting him? Because he got like half an hour against Fulham, and then he'll start in the game against Brentford, maybe get 50, 60 minutes. Or is Pep just not willing to risk him because that injury is still causing him some problems? I'm not quite sure what to make of it. We'll see what Pep says in the press conference tomorrow. For what it's worth, again, watching him against Fulham, I think he looked pretty sharp. He didn't look like someone that was massively concerned about an injury, but then, you know, we don't have details from the medical staff who will be telling Pep Guardiola how many minutes he can play, because they don't want to overload him too quickly. So I said this last week and I got it wrong. If I had to bet, I think he will start this week, but it's far from guaranteed. And if you're not sure, and we don't get any early team news on Saturday about whether or not he starts or not, I don't think he's necessarily worth taking a hit for. And I've been there, right? It hurts when you don't have him and you don't captain him. But I think when a player is a doubt, even Haaland, you have to start thinking about whether that hit is really worth it. Part of it is going to depend on who else you have for captaincy this week. Those of us with Salah, for example, we're probably quite okay with captaining Salah this week if we have to. It's a home game against Southampton. In total, I've just actually put or retweeted an Opta tweet. Salah's done really well in all competitions in terms of kind of goal contributions. It just so happens in the league it hasn't quite worked out, but obviously recently we've seen a few more goals. So I think he's a perfectly good captain if there's doubts around Haaland. Obviously, if they both start, most people are going to go for Haaland, and I probably will too. But if there's any doubts there, I don't think you can take the hit, not for just 1 week, because you can get him in for free next week. You've just got to hope the players you have, which is probably like Kane or De Bruyne or Salah or combinations of those three, just do better for that 1 week. So is it worth it? That really depends on how confident you are of his start. If you think he's going to start and you definitely want to captain him, I would probably take the hit. So I think I'll leave that one there. Anything that I haven't covered, I will try and get to in the final thoughts video tomorrow. I'll obviously put another tweet out asking for some of your questions, and we'll also cover all the latest kind of press conference updates about Wilson, Mitrovic, Haaland, anything else that comes up. I'm sure there'll be something that puts a bit of a spanner in the works, because I'm looking at my team right now, thinking it looks pretty good. I can just make that Alvarez to Jesus or Firmino transfer, and then I'm done up until the World Cup. But something's going to come up in the press conference tomorrow that puts a spanner and all that. So let's see what happens. If you enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and I'll catch you again tomorrow.